It's the winter of 1232. Somewhere out on the barren steppes of Central Asia, the wind howls like a living creature. Beneath that frozen sky, a noblewoman screams, her voice swallowed by the emptiness. 4 Mongol warriors pin her to the ice while a 5th approaches, dragging a horse that's just been slaughtered. Or so it seems. The animal's chest still rises, trembling, gasping for life. Then comes the cut. A single, deliberate slice opens the horse's abdomen. Steam bursts from the wound, the smell of blood and heat and fear filling the air. What happens next defies comprehension. The woman, still thrashing, is forced inside the horse's body, folded into its warmth, her limbs and head left protruding through the grotesque scenes. The executioner sews the flesh shut. The horse convulses, the woman shrieks, and the warriors step away. And then they leave her there. This was not random cruelty. This was the Mongol Empire's bloodless execution, a punishment so methodical, so biologically calculated, that modern forensic scientists still study it today. To outsiders, it seemed barbaric. To the Mongols, it was a masterpiece of spiritual engineering. Because this wasn't just about death, it was about control. You see, the Mongols weren't sadists. They were visionaries of fear. Their laws, recorded in the Yassa, were brutally efficient. Every punishment serving a political, psychological, and spiritual purpose. In this world, punishment wasn't merely retribution. It was theater. It was message. It was power embodied. Steal a horse? Death. Commit adultery? Depends. Who are you? If you're a commoner, perhaps a beating or exile. But if you're a noble, someone whose bloodline carries prestige and potential rebellion, your fate is far darker. Being sewn inside a living horse was a punishment reserved for exactly 3 crimes. Adultery by a noblewoman, treason by an aristocrat, espionage by a captured elite. Notice the pattern? Every one of these crimes involved people of status, individuals whose bloodlines were considered dangerous, whose deaths had to be handled delicately. This was the Mongols' version of precision warfare applied to law. And remember, this was an empire that achieved what no other power in human history ever had. They conquered more territory in 25 years than Rome managed in 400 years. They built an international postal system that outpaced Europe by centuries. They ruled from the Pacific to the edge of Europe, not by brute force alone, but through psychology. To understand why this punishment existed, you must grasp one thing. The Mongols believed that how you killed mattered as much as who you killed. And this particular method, the horse punishment, was designed not for efficiency, but for meaning. Why trap a person inside a living animal instead of simply beheading them? Why create something so elaborate, so horrifying, when a sword could end it instantly? Because to the Mongols, spilling noble blood was not just a crime. It was a cosmic offense, a spiritual contamination that could haunt an empire. But before we dive into that deeper belief, you need to understand what this execution actually entailed. And make no mistake, this was no chaotic act of torture. It was a step-by-step ritual, performed with the precision of surgery and the solemnity of religion. So imagine for a moment that you're there, not as a victim, but as a witness. A Persian diplomat forced to attend a spectacle of Mongol justice. You'll record what you see in your chronicle, but words will fail you for the rest of your life. This is what you would have seen. First, the condemned is stripped naked. Her wrists and ankles are bound, not tightly, but just enough to prevent escape while keeping blood flow intact. The details matter, because this execution wasn't meant to be fast. It was meant to be deliberate. Then, a horse is chosen. Not an old nag, not a dying beast. An animal in its prime, strong and healthy, usually a mare weighing up nearly half a ton. The horse is wrestled to its side. Warriors pin its legs while the executioner makes a clean, practiced incision along the belly, roughly 2 feet long. The horse's scream rips through the cold air. Its insides glisten, steaming against the frost. Then, the executioner pushes its organs aside, creating an open cavity, room enough for a human body, curled into a fetal position. The woman is forced into that cavity, folded like a child inside a womb of death. Her head protrudes from one end, her feet from the other. Her arms are drawn through 2 smaller slits in the horse's hide. Then, using sinew threads made from animal tendon, as strong as bowstring, the incision is sewn shut. Tight enough that she cannot move, loose enough that she can still breathe. The horse is released. Sometimes it staggers to its feet, sometimes it only writhes in agony. Either way, the victim is now trapped within a living tomb of flesh and heat. And then, silence. Everyone leaves. No one is allowed to look back. It's part of the ritual. The condemned must die unseen. But the real horror, the true ingenuity, wasn't the physical act itself. It was what came next. Because the Mongols understood something that even medieval Europe didn't. They knew precisely how long the human body could endure heat, lack of oxygen, and infection. They engineered this execution to unleash 3 competing forms of death, each one slower than the last. Death race 1, heat and hypothermia. The moment the horse is sewn shut, the victim is locked in a living furnace. A horse's body temperature runs close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but as it thrashes and dies, that heat spikes. Within an hour, the temperature inside the cavity can soar above 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Her body begins to overheat, her brain swelling as her temperature rises past the point of survival. Her sweat can't evaporate, her body can't cool down. Within 90 minutes, she's delirious, her neurons misfiring, her heart hammering as if it's trying to escape her chest. But as the horse finally dies, its heat begins to drop rapidly, and the temperature inside the cavity shifts. She goes from searing heat to freezing cold. The same mechanism that cooked her now starts to kill her through shock. Death race 2, suffocation. Folded in that fetal position, her diaphragm is crushed against her lungs. She can't take full breaths. As rigor mortis sets in, the horse's body stiffens and compresses her further. Oxygen levels plummet. She's effectively drowning without water, her brain screaming for air that won't come. Medieval observers compared the sound of her shallow gasps to a drowning song. Modern forensic scientists call this positional asphyxiation. It's the same way some modern torture victims die. Average survival time? Roughly 7 hours. Death race 3? Infection. The third killer is invisible. The horse's organs, its intestines, its bile, its stomach acids are teeming with bacteria. When she was dragged across the frozen ground, her skin was torn open, leaving 1,000 invisible wounds. Now those wounds are exposed to a microbial storm. Within hours, her body begins to react. Fever, swelling, delirium. Her immune system turns on itself. If by some miracle she survives the heat and the suffocation, the infection will take her. Slowly, agonizingly. And if all that wasn't enough, there's a fourth horror. The smell. The scent of blood, rot, and terror travels miles across the plains. Wolves and vultures come. Some accounts describe them tearing at the exposed limbs of the victim while she's still conscious. To the Mongols, this was not cruelty. It was purification. And that right there is where this story takes a chilling turn. Because as horrific as this sounds, the Mongols saw it as an act of mercy. Why would a culture that mastered warfare, engineering, and governance choose a punishment so grotesque? Why not just use a sword and be done with it? The answer lies in the Mongols' most sacred belief, a fear deeper than death itself. To spill blood, they believed, was to release the soul, and the released soul, especially that of a noble or warrior, could haunt, curse, or pollute the living world. Blood wasn't just life, it was spirit. Containment of blood meant containment of chaos. This belief was ancient, woven to every part of Mongol society. It shaped their laws, their rituals, even their diets. To them, killing without spilling blood was the ultimate form of spiritual hygiene. Foreign visitors were baffled by this. Giovanni de Piando Carpin, a papal envoy who traveled through Mongolia in the 1240s, wrote with confusion, "They slay princes without a drop of blood, as if blood itself were the sin." He didn't realize he was watching one of history's earliest examples of ritualized psychological warfare. The Mongols perfected what could be called clean killing, executions that left no trace of blood, no stain on the earth, no risk of spiritual contamination. The horse punishment was only one of several bloodless methods. Let's count them. Method 1. The carpet crush. The condemned is rolled tightly into a felt rug or carpet. Then horses trample them. Every bone breaks, every organ ruptures, but no blood spills. It's internal destruction hidden from the gods. This was famously how the last Abbasid caliph of Baghdad was killed in 1258, his royal blood never touching the ground. Method 2. The river death. Some offenders, especially shamans or spiritual figures, were drowned instead. Water was seen as cleansing, absorbing the spirit harmlessly into nature. Method 3. The horse burial. The punishment we've already seen, death through heat, suffocation, infection, or predators, all internal. No blood shed, no soul released. Method 4. The spine snap. A simpler but equally chilling technique, bending the condemned backward over a warrior's knee until their spine snapped. Death came slowly from internal bleeding, invisible to the eye, spiritually clean. In every case, the principle was the same. No blood touches the earth. The Mongols believed that if noble blood spilled, it could poison the land, curse the tribe, or anger the sky god Tengri. This taboo was so deeply ingrained that even in battle, Mongol warriors tried to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. They preferred suffocation, strangulation, or even crushing blows that killed without gore. That's why they drank Mir's milk instead of slaughtering animals needlessly, and why spilling someone's drink was considered an unforgivable insult. It symbolized wasting life. So when the Mongols sentenced a noble to death by the horse, it wasn't because they wanted to prolong suffering, it was because they feared what their blood could do if released. It was cosmic damage control disguised as cruelty. But here's the twist. In their quest to contain blood, they engineered one of the most psychologically devastating executions in human history, one that terrified enemies far more than open violence ever could. Because imagine this, you're an aristocrat captured by the Mongols. You know they won't decapitate you. They'll bury you alive inside a dying animal. Your blood will never touch the earth, but your screams will echo through it. That knowledge alone broke people before the punishment ever began. Yet history records one extraordinary case where the ritual failed. A woman, noble by birth, condemned by law, was sewn into a living horse and lived to tell the tale. Her survival would shake the empire to its core. The story begins during the reign of Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis himself. By this time, the Mongol Empire was no longer just a swarm of horsemen sweeping across continents. It had evolved into a machine of governance, wealth, and law. Yet beneath that new polish, the old ways still pulsed. The taboos, the rituals, the unbreakable belief that noble blood could never be spilled. And then came her. The chronicles don't agree on her name. Some Persian texts call her Naren, meaning sunlight. Others simply referred to her as the noble concubine. Whatever her name was, she was accused of the gravest offense a woman of her class could commit: adultery with a foreign diplomat, a Chinese official who had gained Kublai's favor. In Mongol law, that was more than betrayal, it was contamination, a mixing of bloodlines, a violation of purity. The sentence was immediate: death by horse burial. She was dragged to the steppes outside Karakorum, the old capital of the empire. Her accusers watched as warriors performed the ritual step by step. The incision, the screams, the stitching shut. No one doubted she'd be dead by morning. But fate, perhaps even the gods, had other plans. That night, something went wrong. The horse, instead of lingering for hours as it should have, died almost instantly. Not from its wound, but from shock. Modern veterinarians have confirmed what the Mongols couldn't have known scientifically. Horses can literally die of fear. Under extreme stress, their heart rate skyrockets to over 200 beats per minute. Cardiac arrest follows within minutes. And when that horse's heart stopped beating, everything changed. The temperature inside the carcass began to plummet. The steppes at night can dip to near freezing, and the warmth that was cooking the woman alive now began to cool. Her body, delirious from heat exhaustion, found momentary relief in the chill. Her breathing steadied. Her mind flickered back to life. She realized she was still alive. And that realization sparked something primal: the will to survive. Bound inside that grotesque cocoon, she began to fight. The sinew stitches that sealed her in were thick and strong, but organic, fibers of tendon. She couldn't move her arms, but she could move her head. So she used what she had left: her teeth. One by one, she began to chew the stitches. The threads were tough, soaked in blood and bile, slippery and vile. She bit until her gums bled, until her teeth cracked. Hours passed, 8, maybe 10. Her lips tore apart, but she managed to fray a single stitch, then another, and another. Eventually, she created a hole, just large enough to push her shoulders through. She tore herself free, crawling out of the horse's cooling body like something reborn. The sight must have been unimaginable. Naked, blood-soaked, half delirious, she stumbled through the steppes under the moonlight, dragging her ruined body towards a cluster of nomadic yurts in the distance. 2 days later, herders found her collapsed by a stream. They carried her to their camp, wrapped her in hides, and began to treat her using traditional Mongol remedies: fermented mare milk to rehydrate her, animal fat poultices for her wounds, smoke and ritual chants to drive away evil spirits. By every law of medicine, she should have been dead, but she lived. When word reached Kublai Khan, it sparked a crisis unlike any his empire had faced before. Because if the Yassa, the sacred law handed down from Genghis himself, had ordered her death, and she survived, what did that mean? Was she innocent? Have the gods intervened? Or worse, had the empire's most sacred ritual failed? The court was thrown into chaos. Religious advisors, shamans, and scholars argued for days. Some claimed she was blessed by Tengri, the sky god, proof that her soul was pure and unjustly condemned. Others insisted she was a demon, sustained by dark magic. Kublai, the ever-pragmatic emperor, took a different view. He saw an opportunity. The Mongol Empire by then was merging with Chinese, Tibetan, and Islamic traditions. It was an age of transition, old superstitions giving way to new philosophies. The Khan declared that the gods had given him a sign. The law must evolve. He didn't abolish the horse punishment outright, that would have been heresy, but he modified it. From that day forward, executioners were ordered to check the victim after 6 hours. If the condemned was still alive, the sentence was to be completed manually, a firm, bloodless strangulation, ensuring death by nightfall. The reform was small but revolutionary. It acknowledged that even divine laws could falter, and that mercy in small doses had a place in the Mongol order. As for Naren, or whatever her name truly was,
Her fate after recovery remains shrouded in mystery. Some chronicles claim Kublai pardoned her and sent her to a Buddhist monastery. Others say she vanished into exile, living out her days as a healer on the steppes. But one thing is certain: her survival marked the end of the empire's darkest ritual. By the early 1300s, as the Mongols converted to Islam and Buddhism, the horse punishment faded. It was replaced by strangulation with a silk cord, still bloodless, still spiritually pure, but mercifully swift. The last recorded instance of the horse burial occurred in 1304 in Persia. After that, it disappeared from the historical record, leaving behind only whispers and warnings. Yet the story of the woman who escaped it, who clawed her way out of death itself, became legend. Her defiance haunted Mongol culture for generations. Some saw her as proof of human resilience, others as a reminder that even the strongest empire cannot command the will of the gods. But this story isn't just about one woman. It's about a civilization that built an empire on reason and still bowed to superstition. A people who could design siege engines of genius, yet feared a drop of blood. And that paradox, the coexistence of brilliance and brutality, is what makes the Mongols so endlessly fascinating. Because their obsession with control didn't end with punishment, it shaped everything.
History has a way of burying its darkest truths. The Mongol horse punishment, what we might call the Bloodless tomb, wasn't just an ancient horror story. It was a philosophy, a worldview that turned the fear of blood into a system of control. When we read about it today, our first instinct is revulsion. How could anyone justify something so vile? How could an empire that built roads, minted coins, and codified laws also design such precision suffering? But that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. It was rational. To the Mongols, the horse execution wasn't madness. It was order. Every step, every stitch, every scream had meaning. To us, it's horror. To them, it was harmony with the divine. Think about that. They weren't trying to make death chaotic or painful for its own sake. They were trying to make it clean, spiritually balanced, cosmically justified. The pain was just collateral. And that's where this story transcends history. Because if you look closely, the logic behind it has never really died. We still create systems that hide the blood. We still demand that punishment be clean. Lethal injections, soundproof death chambers, drone strikes launched from continents away. The executioner's hands stay spotless, but the result is the same. The Mongols just didn't disguise it behind clinical terms. They called it what it was: justice through containment. That's what chills modern historians the most. The Mongols weren't primitive, they were advanced. They engineered a form of invisible death 8 centuries before the world even had the language for it. Their empire was built not just on conquest, but on comprehension. They studied what terrified the human mind and learned how to wield it like a weapon. And here's the haunting part. It worked. Every conquered city, every surrendered army, every trembling diplomat who bent the knee to Kublai Khan did so not out of respect for Mongol mercy, but from sheer, conditioned terror. Fear wasn't the byproduct of their system, it was the system. When you strip away the spectacle, the horses, the sinew, the rituals, what remains is a truth as old as power itself. Control isn't about how many people you kill, it's about how many people believe you could. That's what the Mongols mastered. They understood that fear multiplies itself. Once it's planted in a culture, it doesn't need to be enforced. It enforces itself. The threat of the horse punishment became bigger than the punishment. It became a myth, a symbol, a living ghost that galloped through the collective imagination of nations. In Persia, mothers warned disobedient children that Mongols would sew them into a horse if they misbehaved. In Russia, nobles prayed that if they ever fell to Mongol hands,
Their blood might be spilled swiftly, not trapped within an animal's flesh. In Europe, scholars wrote about barbarians whose cruelty bordered on sorcery, unable to see that the cruelty they described was actually philosophy in disguise. Even centuries later, when the empire faded, its shadow remained. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing of all, because every generation tells itself it's more civilized than the last. We look back at the Mongols and think, how could they? But look around. How much of what we call modern justice is built on the same foundation? Punishment made invisible, suffering sanitized, systems that destroy without drawing blood. The Mongols just didn't hide the horror behind bureaucracy, they turned it into ritual. And in that raw honesty, there's something profoundly revealing about humanity itself. Our urge to control, our fear of chaos, our desperate need to make even death obey our rules. That's what the Mongols achieved, not just through war, but through psychology. They built a civilization on the edge between faith and fear, law and legend. And though their empire has long turned to dust, that edge, that understanding of how belief can bend the will of millions, still cuts just as sharply today. So when you hear the word Mongol, don't just picture a horde of riders with bows and fire. Picture lawmakers, strategists, engineers of obedience. People who saw the human soul not as sacred, but as something that could be managed, contained, like blood inside a body. And remember the woman who proved them wrong, the one who broke the stitches, who defied death itself. Because in her struggle, you glimpse the other side of this story, the side that refuses to yield, no matter the odds. She was buried in darkness, swallowed by very system meant to erase her. But she